Thank you so much. Excellencies, dear friends, welcome to the second panel of today. My name is Fredrikson. I am the Executive Director of Arctic Frontiers, an organization based in Arctic Norway, in Tromsø, with the mission of facilitating knowledge-based development in the Arctic. Since February 2022, we have heard that Arctic exceptionalism is broken. And indeed, we have been amid an Arctic separation. Avenues of cooperation, as we knew them, have been broken and are still being mended. On a positive note, as we could hear from today's first panel, the most important body of Arctic collaboration, namely the Arctic Council, is back to work. And I believe that I can speak on behalf of many of us here in the room when I say how pleased I am to hear of the progress that the Council is making. This second panel is titled Avenues for Arctic Cooperation, and we will hear from a panel of experts consisting of people who practice Arctic either in an Arctic state, coming from non-Arctic countries, or from the Arctic themselves. And we aim at having a hands-on approach. How do we move forward in Arctic cooperation? And now I invite the panelists to join me here on stage as I introduce you. Our first speaker is Ambassador of Canada to Iceland, Jeannette Menzies. She was appointed Canada's ambassador in 2021, but she has 22 years of service at the Canadian Foreign Service. She has worked with Arctic issues at the headquarters, has also been posted in Oslo and in Anchorage, and she played an instrumental role in the establishment of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Nunavut. Ambassador. Our next speaker is Clara Ganslandt, Head of Western Europe Arctic Regional Division within the European External Action Service. And since September 2022, she has also served as the Special Envoy for Arctic Matters. Clara. Our third speaker is a professional civil servant and a diplomat. He is the senior advisor for Arctic Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Poland. He had that role between 2017 and 2020 and resumed it again in 2023. He is the Polish representative in the Senior Arctic Officials Group of the Arctic Council and also one of the editors of Poland's Polar Policy, Piotr Rakowski. Our fourth speaker was born and raised in a reindeer herding family in Norway and in Sweden. She is currently the head of the Saami Council EU unit, but she previously has, amongst many other things, held the position of Executive Secretary of the Arctic Council Indigenous Peoples Secretariat, Elle Merete Omma. And last but not least, Mika, Riipi, the County Governor of the Regional Council of Lapland since March 2013. The mission of the Regional Council of Lapland is to represent the well-being of the region, its municipalities, and the inhabitants of Lapland in all issues regarding development, planning, research, as well as interests in the region. Mika, please. So, as we all know, the current situation has challenged the traditional forms of Arctic cooperation. In light of the new geopolitical dynamics, how have you, from your respective viewpoints, shifted the focus of international cooperation efforts with regards to Arctic? Ambassador Menzies, may we start with you?
Is this working? Yeah. Thanks for that question. I thought I would use the opportunity to speak about an event that happened recently in Reykjavik, so I can speak from my own personal experience, but it's one that shows this idea of new avenues. And this isn't really a new avenue, but I would say it's maybe an avenue that's going to be used a little bit more than it was before. And this is the recent meeting that took place between the Prime Ministers of the Nordic countries and the Prime Minister of Canada. Canada was invited as a special guest to a meeting of Nordic prime ministers in Iceland in June. This is the first time Canada's ever been invited as a special guest to this forum. And of course, the Nordics meet all the time, but my favorite quote from that meeting was the following, that Canada's the most Nordic of the non-Nordics. I don't know. Maybe not all agree, but I thought it was a nice quote. So this meeting was not just about Arctic. It was about a whole bunch of other things. It included a conversation on, I've wrote down some reminders, rules-based international order being top, climate and green transition, of course, oceans, the importance of combating plastics, Arctic Central Ocean and need for protection. And one of the major follow-ups from this was a commitment for foreign ministers to meet and engage in an ongoing dialogue between Canada and the Nordics. So I thought that's sort of an interesting new area, and if people want to learn more about it, you can Google the Canada-Nordic Leaders Joint Statement from June 26th, 2023. And I have to say, it was also, I've been involved in Arctic Council and other negotiations, actually the Arctic Science Agreement and the Search and Rescue Agreement, and I've always found those to be such great avenues of cooperation, of course, and great negotiations. But this Nordic Summit statement, it took like only 3 days to negotiate. Like, I couldn't believe how quickly the Nordics and Canada came up with text that they all agreed on. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. Would you then say that bilateral state-to-state cooperation has increased?
Yes, I would, but I don't think that is necessarily a result of the conflict. I think that was happening anyway. And I'll just name two accomplishments that I'm proud of, where Canada and working with the Kingdom of Denmark, specifically vis-a-vis Greenland, has concluded 2 separate initiatives, which I think maybe this time has allowed us the time to conclude these things. But one was the boundary dispute related to Hans Island and the Lincoln Sea. The final negotiation of that took place in Iceland. I keep finding everything Arctic always lands in Iceland, so it's kind of a fun place to be. And then the other event was a signing of an agreement, a letter of intent related to the Pikialaksorsuaq Polynia, which is an area of water in the northern part of Greenland and Canada, which will be basically governed by Indigenous people. So this is another thing that, in terms of state to state, we've been able to make great progress in a number of those areas.
Thank you. Special Envoy Ganslandt, how has the European Union shifted your focus in international Arctic cooperation?
So the change of focus, of course, we could not continue business as usual with Russia. We think that until there is Russia's ending its war of aggression on Ukraine, it will not be possible to rebuild today's disrupted cooperation. But at the same time, we must continue addressing all the multifaceted challenges that we heard about all through the afternoon now. So, and here, for instance, the impact of climate change means that we absolutely have need to have some level of cooperation going. So in this complex geopolitical circumstances, we continue as EU the efforts on the priorities that we set out in our Arctic policy of 2021. And climate change has already been highlighted, but I do that again. But also safeguarding of the environment, sustainable development, and international cooperation. And if I still have a little bit of time now, I can also give a few examples. So here, for instance, just to recall that we continue our very strong support and focus on Arctic research. And here, just to remind that the EU provides over 380 million euros in funding for Arctic research under Horizon 2020 and our Horizon Europe program. And a particular example of this, where we had to refocus and put emphasis on like-minded partners, is the All-Atlantic Research Alliance. This is a major ocean science diplomatic tool, and it brings together stakeholders from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean to work on common objectives. I will not go into detail, but just I have to highlight the work at the global level that we do on climate change and biodiversity, and that we continue to be a leader now for the COP28. Also, we are focusing on areas such as Earth observation, and the Copernicus program, which actually now provides a lot of data which can be accessed by anybody who is interested. There is also a very important pillar, which is upholding of international law, and I think that is also really a focus for the European Union. And working on important treaties like the what we did, for instance, on the BBNJ, which was mentioned by the high-level speakers earlier in this symposium. Thank you.
Thank you. What about from a Polish perspective? How have your efforts changed?
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, organizers, for inviting me. I think I'll start because I'm a big follower of battery in real life and also in digital life. So I will quote that perhaps I will try to also get into the boots of being non-diplomatic diplomat, or maybe even arrogant in a way. I would like to refer to our Poland's polar policy, which I remember, and you also referred in very kind introduction. I was very much engaged in since 2017 and pushing within the House and with other ministries that it's relevant, that we have to have something strategic because of the obvious things as climate change, relying on our experience in both polar regions and so on and so forth. And it was not so, I would say, enthusiastically received, but I was pushy. And fortunately, in 2020, the document was adopted in difficult times because it was the pandemic, but nevertheless, and then I left. And when I came back a few months ago, back to the ministry, everybody was so happy that now we have a strategic document because the situation, especially in the north, has changed geopolitically as the topic of the panel. And it's so great that we have this document, not actually referring that I was pushing for this, but nevertheless, that there was something that everybody was enthusiastic. But being serious, I would say that it's in a way, we are in the process, I would say, of something that perhaps the lawyer would very much refer to as adaptation or implementation of this political guidelines or the political strategy for a number of reasons. The Russia was mentioned and the geopolitical concerns, let me put it this way, but even more broader aspect in terms of coming back to the tradition of the Polish research. But if I would characterize, and perhaps there will be a chance for the further discussion later on, I would say that our strategy somehow relies on the three legs. One is the scientific, historical evidence and engagement in both regions, but in this respect in the Arctic, which is strong, sometimes or actually often not perhaps so much represented in the exact working groups of the Arctic Council, but in a sense of Polish researchers being present on an annual basis in the region is complemented. The second one is a political or semi-political one, which is the Polish initiative for the Warsaw Format, and I will leave it for later. And the third one, which also I personally find disappointing, is business or sustainable development that we can take advantage of as the country on a mutual basis. I mean, in terms of being present, investing, or looking for collaboration. There were some promising aspects in the past, but we were, for the number of years recently, we didn't follow. So hoping that now with the, as perhaps some of you know, with the change in the government, perhaps they might be even followed. So I would say that the external aspects to our national policy somehow are supplemented by existing document that we can really work on and putting in the wheels into turning, if I can put it this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Elle, Merete.
Thank you so much. Well, as a Saami, we live in 4 national states, and we have collaborated with each other since time immemorial. And this collaboration, we have learned afterward, is called international collaboration. So that is the backbone of how we work. And when the Arctic Council was founded, I mean, it fitted perfectly to our needs. We were secured a seat at the table. Our knowledge was respected, and decisions for how our home, Arctic, can develop was at the core of the discussions. And of course, the geopolitical situation changed, and what we saw was that partners outside of the Arctic tried to find a room for themselves in the Arctic conversation. And we kept on receiving invitations to new fora that wanted to discuss Arctic matters. And the problems with these fora is that we, as indigenous peoples, are not secured a seat at the table, which is quite demanding for us to try to fight our way to the table, as we don't have to do that in the Arctic Council. So that has put pressure on our already limited resources to try to respond to all of these invitations. So that has changed for us. So we're quite happy that we see Arctic Council is back on track again.
So it really also boils down to capacity in your...
Pardon?
It really boils down to capacity also, seen from an indigenous perspective.
It does, because we need to participate to new avenues, raise the same questions about the right to actually have a seat at the table, have a discussions of why we should be at the various fora, and like start with awareness raising all over again. And that is both time and resource demanding.
Thank you. Mika, you represent the regions here. How has your Arctic collaboration internationally changed?
I must say that, of course, the situation 1 year and a half ago was quite dramatic for us, given the thought that we have of over 400 kilometers of a border with Russia, and suddenly within 1 day, it was sort of mentally closed. And actually today we see from the news that it's also officially closed. Our Prime Minister has announced that since the Russians are so interested in our coming presidential elections, the border will be closed for 2 weeks totally. At that time, of course, Lapland was actually chairman of Northern Forum, which is a circumpolar regional collaboration forum with a lot of Russian regions participating. And at that time also Finland has had a chairmanship in the Barents collaboration in the international level, and in the regional level it was in Russia. So that meant that actually the base of Barents collaboration sort of collapsed, and we resigned from the Northern Forum. And it affected so that actually all of our international strategy had to be rethinked. And actually we built up within few months a new strategy. And of course the situation didn't affect Lapland as a negative in economical impact point of view, because, for example, tourism from Russia, it has never been big in Lapland, and there aren't so much business collaboration with the Russians. Actually, from the development point of view, the situation has actually raised the role of Lapland. Now everyone in Finland knows that without the Lapland, actually Finland is an island. And if something happens in the Baltic Sea, it's quite important that we have the road connections to Sweden and Norway. That meant that the geopolitical role of the northern Scandinavia came quite much stronger, and of course our joining to NATO and hopefully soon Swedish neighbors will also join us. That meant that from the security of supply point of view and also from the military mobility point of view, the hotspot was actually at the north. So that plus the situation that in whole Europe we must hurry to get rid out of for Russian fossil fuel. That meant that there's a huge boost now in an economic level. For example, the energy production, wind power, pump power, and hydrogen economy, plus the critical minerals which actually exist in North. So that meant that our collaboration directions, the focus went on the Nordic level, in the North Kalot level, and of course in the European Union level. And for those purposes, we, for example, joined the CPMRA and Baltic Sea Commission and started working there. So it has changed a lot in a regional perspective.
We look forward to hearing more of that a little later in the discussion. But I wanted to ask about Arctic cooperation. And Piotr, you are one of the few who have actually been involved in the international Arctic cooperation already before the time of the pandemic, which of course changed all of our ways of working. I wanted to ask you whether the cooperation between observers and Arctic states has changed based on your experience.
I think, well, let me put it this way. I was organizing the Warsaw format, which is the initiative that we launched in 2010. And initially, it was the meeting between current chair in the Arctic Council, the Arctic Council observers, and basically the relatively big family of researchers, Arctic researchers. And it was, in a way, I would say, relatively passive meeting. Exchange of ideas, some presentations, obviously on the important topics, but certain dynamic was missing. And often, as I always say, on one hand, I'm fascinating doing the Arctic business, but on the other hand, I feel small, which is not difficult because I'm already small, but nevertheless, there are so many topics which are so scientifically oriented that I cannot follow. So perhaps I had a tendency to look for the dialogue which will be much more digestive also for me in terms of from the public service perspective. So slowly but slowly, by 2019, we are trying to make the Warsaw format a bit more, not living the research, but to having a platform of a discussion with the current presidency and the observers more on the, let's say, diplomatic or foreign policy aspects related. And then, because of pandemic first and then the war in Ukraine, there was an obvious break. And in 2019, when I was actually hired back to the ministry, I was facing a dilemma on one hand, whether this instrument is still relevant. Secondly, it's relevant for the times that just came. Thirdly, knowing how much headache has the current chair in both in transition and handling the Arctic Council, bringing additional thing or additional dish to the table is sometimes perhaps not the best option. But fourth, or last but not least, I was not so sure whether the other observers will be interested in this form of dialogue or actually developing this form of dialogue or platform. And our meeting in September proved that actually it is. And it was not, I mean, it was nice to have a success as an organizer, but more importantly, I received so much feedback, both from Norway and other participants, let's say from Arctic Council Secretariat, Indigenous Peoples Secretariat, and other observers, that we should let's say, carry on. We should look for more or different aspects of agenda related to the Arctic, but also taking into account, because there are a number of observers that raise the concerns. I'm sorry, I didn't mention European Union, which I should also, sorry for that, which actually makes the link between the Arctic Council, European Union, and the observers, especially those observers which are EU member states. So, so now I'm actually in the process of reflecting, trying to accommodate those interests and perspectives, because we know that this instrument is actually working and can work even better for the future reference. And well, there are a number of ideas that we actually have in mind, but we would like to move on. I don't know whether I have replied totally into your question, because I think that we are, in a way, in transition for the moment. So
it sounds like it's an ongoing process.
Yes, but definitely what's going on outside is somehow influencing us. And perhaps it's also a speeding factor or influential factor. We'll see. Thank you.
Now, we already touched upon regional collaboration, and I'd like to move forward to that topic, because even before the pandemic, we witnessed an increasing call from the regions to be heard when it comes to Arctic issues and Arctic policy. And the creation of Arctic Mayors Forum, I think, is the concrete proof of that. Arctic policy, as we all know, is often made in the capitals, but like Director General Witcheva said earlier today, implementation happens locally. How do you work hands-on with regional cooperation? And perhaps we start with Elle, Merete, or Mika.
Almost caught me on surprise there. Well, we do regional collaboration like every day, on a daily basis, both as like just doing Saami businesses, doing Saami research. There's so many different elements to it. But of course also, one of the benefits that we've had in the recent years is being able to analyze how international policy making, how that reflects back on a regional level. And the EU Commission has been very helpful in assisting us to give us that opportunity to actually analyze different EU policies and translate them into a Saami context. So that has been very beneficial, and I think that has also been a wake-up call for many of the Saamis, and see how much influence EU decisions actually has on our daily lives. It comes to business exports, it comes to education, it comes to all sectors of society. Not to talk about mitigation measures for the climate crisis. That is perhaps the most obvious impact of how EU policies shape our daily lives. And later tomorrow, or I think it's tomorrow, we will talk more about the Critical Raw Material Act and how that has reflected, or will potentially reflect, and impact Saami traditional way of life. So I think there's an interesting dynamic between linking the international policy mechanisms with regional, like grassroots activities to learn more. And there's also a need for awareness raising to be able to tailor policies to actually gear them towards the people who lives in the Arctic. Yeah, I think I stopped here.
Thank you. Mika.
It's easy to continue, because in the regional level I see it also as a quite ordinary daily work that we do, especially of course in Lapland. We have three borders, two borders now, when the Russian border is closed with the Swedish and Norwegian friends, and of course if you want to sort of characterize the ways of collaboration, one is of course the formal collaboration structures that we have in the northern part. As I mentioned, Northern Forum is now, it's actually operating in the Russian side, but that's a Russian organization now. but parents collaboration still exists. That plays a little role. Then, of course, the North Calotte collaboration has been ongoing for 50 years. And for example, in the European Union context, we have NSPA, Northern Sparsely Populated Areas Network, and collaboration with that. So structures are one form of working. But then actually more meaningful collaboration is, for example, in the field of development. We try to utilize, for example, those European Union funding mechanisms, Interreg programs we have, and joint Interreg in the northern part of Scandinavia. And besides that, of course, we try to have a sort of a joint political discussions, bilateral or in different forms, in order to have a strategic plans of a development in between the regions. And the main task and main challenge in that is actually that we do a quite good cooperation in the regional level, but many times when you try to call to Oslo or Stockholm or Helsinki, nobody answers, or if answers, then the answers are a little bit different depending on the team. So what we are aiming is, of course, that also the state level collaboration hopefully will tighten in the future.
Just a quick follow-up, and please be short. If you were to wish, what would be your wish for Helsinki when you call next time?
Well, that they answer.
Okay, that's an easy one. Ambassador Menzies, moving over to the North American side.
Sure. I would argue that to be a true Arctician, one must not only focus on, but prioritize regional cooperation, but go further to community cooperation. And in preparation for all of our Arctic engagements globally, we engage in Canada with what's called the Arctic, it used to be called the Arctic Council Advisory Committee, and now it's called the Arctic Cooperation Advisory Committee, because we wanted to broaden it to different avenues. And I think it's a really interesting mechanism. We also use this as one of the mechanisms through which we created our more recent Arctic framework, which was released in 2019. And I wanted to just give one example where this has really been prominent, and it actually links to a presentation that Kristen, my Canadian colleague, will be giving tomorrow on the Arctic Policy Hackathon that took place in Reykjavik last month. And this directly links to work of the Arctic Mayors Forum, a collaboration that took place with Government of Canada, the Arctic Mayors, and the Gordon Foundation, which is the Canadian foundation. And it brought together youth from across the circumpolar Arctic to do a policy hackathon on emerging policy dialogue. The one this year was on how to keep leaders in the north. Last year it was on questions around food security, food sovereignty. I happen to have the report here, which there's more copies upstairs, and you can learn more about it tomorrow.
Great. Special Envoy Ganslandt, would you like to say something about, from a European Union perspective?
Yes, certainly. And I'm in a very comfortable position here because the speakers before me have already spoken about the projects we have and how they help and support. But what I wanted to say was that for many years, what the EU was doing was more focused perhaps on science and the national level, and was less strong on local focus. And you mentioned yourself the importance of the Arctic Mayors Forum, for instance, and we completely also subscribe to that, and how important it is with the efforts at that level, where indeed the implementation is actually done, and the real issues and real challenges are felt. So here we are now gearing up, and we are creating, for instance, a new project, and it's called the Arctic Urban and Regional Cooperation Program, the AURIC. And this is offering cities the means and structures to be able to participate in international cooperation. And it's focused on sharing, learning, and best practices to tackle local issues. And we really think that this is a very promising initiative, and that it will help then best practices and working together among then 15 cities and towns. Going through the wider Arctic, so including Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. And it will be officially launched in Tromsø at the beginning of next year. So we are extremely excited about that. And this is just an example, but we think that these initiatives are really important and that there can be no sustainable and cohesive development without this action at the regional level.
Thank you.
I give the mic here again, or?
Very shortly, if I may. I would like to refer what Ambassador Menzies said about this changing of semantics, Arctic Council to Arctic cooperation, because it somehow refers to the topic in terms of regional cooperation. I would like to, in a way, improve in implementing our strategy towards the polar regions or the Arctic. I mean, I don't know how is your perspective, but I very often face the challenge when talking to the different ministries in Poland. They are very much, let's say, the office or the ministry oriented. They don't see, let's say, the wider perspective. And I recall the discussion or one of the Norwegian chairship priorities concerning wildfires in the north. And there is something that we have expertise as a country, as a EU country, and we can also provide to the Arctic Council or to the wider Arctic cooperation, and which very often, or in this respect, we simply either miss or forget. Because when you look at this EU cooperation as a regional cooperation, EU coordination mechanism or crisis coordination mechanism, the experts and also from Poland, the fire brigades, they provide assistance. They were, for instance, involved when there were huge fires in the north in Sweden. And this is the expertise that we have. And it simply, somehow remains within the channels between Warsaw and Brussels, and it's not being shared within the, let's say, wider Arctic cooperation, which easily can be. And these are, let's say, those of challenges or issues whenever I talk to the colleagues about the Arctic or our Polish Arctic strategy or Polish Arctic involvement, the question is where we can beyond the research, because the Arctic is research, we have a long history and so on and so forth. These are those examples with relatively small investment or sometimes with no investment, you can already provide this further. So just sort of a comment and context. Thank you.
Thank you. Mika, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, a short comment, because when I was a little bit talking harsh about the ministries, I of course didn't mean the foreign ministry. They always answer in Finland, but if you try to connect, for example, the Ministry of Transport, then we have problems. But actually, the issue with the sectorialized ministry level and system, it's a real problem. And from the regional perspective, we don't have those divisions. We do transport planning with the keen connection, for example, in industrial policy planning. And but in the ministry level, there's a Ministry of Transport, and then there's the Ministry of Economics, and then they don't discuss with each other quite well. And if you think about the Arctic overall, it can't be put in some lockers, like it's transport, or it's environmental policy, or it's a holistic. And that's one of those problems, I believe, also in the European Union level, but also in the national level in many countries, that the Arctic policy hasn't found its place so that it can be seen as a multi-level policy. And from the regional perspective, we see that some kind of solving of this problem could be a key to also to better collaboration in the future.
Elle, Merete.
Yeah, I do echo that we should have a holistic approach to this and try to see an overview of all the challenges, because what we all have in common is the climate crisis. And from the Saami Council perspective, one of the highest priorities is to try to strengthen and increase the collaboration among indigenous peoples in the Arctic, because we always share some of the same challenges, and also both from a nature perspective, but also from a more structural level. So I think it's important for us to have the opportunity to come together and discuss and find common solutions to how to tackle the climate crisis. And last October, well, in October this year, we gathered in Kirkenes at the gathering where both Arctic indigenous peoples, governments, and other NGOs with circumpolar Arctic interest came together, and we had a conversation where we actually could discuss these challenges and possible solutions in a common environment. And I think that's fruitful both for us, but also for the larger Arctic communities. So we're not always, asked for our indigenous tradition or indigenous knowledge, while we don't have had the time to actually discuss among ourselves.
Right. Just a quick note to the audience. I will open the floor for questions relatively soon, so start thinking about those. I will keep an eye on you. So just a few moments. But before we get there, I still want to pose one question to our audience. We've talked about a lot of regional cooperation, and I wanted to ask you, are there existing mechanisms that function really well that you think that should be enhanced, or have some of those mechanisms that we traditionally have had lost their significance? What should we be focusing on going forward? Ambassador?
I'll just maybe echo what the chair of the senior Arctic officials said earlier today, that the Arctic Council remains the preeminent forum, and I think is the forum in which we need to be focused and find ways to navigate. Sorry. An add-on point, there's multiple reasons, historic success of the organization, but it's the inclusion of Indigenous people at the table that I think we cannot be underestimated, the importance of that to every conversation and decision on Arctic issues.
Anyone else? Yeah, please.
Yeah, just to say that we also heard that we could do more of the same, and we heard the need for more capacity, for instance. So I think that from our side we will continue the work of supporting the capacity, for instance, of the Saami Council.
Thank you. Mika, and then Elle Merete.
Now I must first of all say that I'm not a diplomat, and now I'm a regional authority and also a politician, so I have quite straight opinions about the current situation. I think that, for example, the work of the Arctic Council, that's important, and it's good to know that they are back online. Of course, the hopes that around that table there would be also representatives of another people than the indigenous people who are living in the north should be raised up. Then of course the new networks like Arctic Mayors, it's excellent that this level has been activating and works quite circumpolar also. But then if you come back to the regional level and sort of those substructures that we have, and now I'm talking with the Finnish perspective and with the Nordic perspective, we have, as I mentioned, we have the Barents collaboration. Even though we don't have the Barents anymore, it's something white there behind the border, or black, depending how you want to colorize it. Then we have the North Calotte collaboration. We are now joined to the CPMR, and then we have the NSBA network, and we have quite little of resources. And at the same time, we have a little bit crisis on for example, in the European Union's Northern Dimension policy. What's the future of that? We have lack of resources and also principles of work, if we talk about the work of a Nordic Ministerial Council in Finland. So what I'm trying to see now that actually this is quite good opportunity to see those collaboration structures more together. How and in what form, I don't have an answer to that. But the most valuable thing from the Barents collaboration was the sort of a bilateral governance system where the ministerial level and the regional level worked in the same tables. That could be a base of a new collaboration structure, and linking it to the Nordic ministerial policy working, and also to the European Union Northern Dimension policy initiative in the future could be an answer. So referring to the last panel where they discussed that no more new forums, I totally agree. We can actually have them even less and make them effective.
Thank you. Elle, Merete, and then Piotr.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with all the speakers here who has pointed out Arctic Council as the main vehicle for discussion of Arctic matters. I think they are crucial, and if we know the amount of knowledge that is produced within the framework of the Arctic Council is quite unique, and I think we need to discuss how all these recommendations can trickle down on a regional or local level. How can we start implementing all the knowledge that is produced within the framework of the Arctic Council? So that is the first point. And the second point is, of course, if we want to take the Arctic Council to the next level, we need to make sure that the permanent participants are supported in a sufficient way so they can be a professional and a good partner for the Council.
Thank you. Piotr.
Yes, thank you. I would agree, but I would be slightly, maybe a bit bitter. I agree with the statement that creating a new structure is very often not the answer for the existing problems, because we're just simply creating the structure and the problems would remain. And I agree that the Arctic Council is like it was said with the number of speakers in this panel and previously, a well-equipped structure. However, it doesn't mean that there might not be certain improvements. And from this perspective, I mean, observer state perspective and as a leader of the Warsaw format, I think there is a room for improvement of the dialogue or creating a platform which will be creating. It already exists, but still will be better and providing an added value for the Arctic Council or the wider, like was mentioned by Ambassador Menzies, the wider European Arctic cooperation, not Arctic Council, but Arctic cooperation. And why is that? And I think that's relevant, and the relevance is somehow observed also with, I think, one of your very first questions in this panel. I mean, the changed geopolitical environment and the concerns and challenges that do exist. They might end one day. I do hope so, that the war would finish sooner than later. But it doesn't mean that the other challenges, or the new challenges, would not remain. And I think that there is a certain added value that within, let's say, Arctic Council observer states is still there, and we can work on that to provide more as a platform, as a mechanism to the overall work of this initiative.
Thank you. Now I've noted 2 questions on the floor. We'll take them simultaneously. We'll start with Arthur Amelot, and then we had a gentleman here on the 4th row. If we could get mics to them, and if we have any more questions, please raise your hands, and I'll still keep an eye on you.
Thank you very much, Anu. Thank you very much to the panelists for these explanations. My question will go firstly to Mrs. Ganslandt and Mr. Rakowski, but everybody can answer, of course. I would like to question really concerning regional cooperation and avenues for Arctic cooperation. I would like to question the EU process and I would say how the EU can be better expressing cooperation with the Arctic, notably not only the EU Commission, EU Parliament, EU institutions, but also the member states. If we consider that not all the member states have an Arctic strategy, if we consider that not all the member states have a thorough interest in the Arctic, I'm referring to discussion I had with diplomats from Croatia that was saying to me, the Arctic, yeah, they were not too sure. Bulgaria, I know they are beginning to be interested in Arctic affairs, but how, therefore, could the EES, the Commission, or I don't know, be assured that every members of the European Parliament, so the 27, could actually like push further their Arctic agenda, because we know that there is an interest for climate change. If we look at the opposite of the Earth, the Antarctic Treaty, we see that even the Republic Serenissima of San Marino is a non-consultative party to the Antarctic Treaty system. So there is therefore a lack of something, and I would like therefore to know if what the European Commission can do, what the EES can do, and perhaps developments of further cooperation.
Thank you. And then we'll take the second question from the fourth row simultaneously, and then we'll turn to our panelists.
Thank you very much for all speakers' interventions. I work in the European External Action Service. My question is to the Canadian ambassador. If you look at the participation of subnational actors in Arctic cooperation, how do you see the role of the Canadian regions? I'd be curious to learn more.
Thank you. Why don't we start with the first question, Special Envoy?
Yeah, so thank you for that very, very good question. I mean, what more the EU could do? And I think we should link perhaps to the previous panel, because I think one thing we could do more is to actually continue this awareness raising of how we are all interlinked and how climate change impacts what happens in the Arctic impacts all over the world. And this, as we also heard earlier this morning, that from the outside there is a perspective, and one might not know very much, but it's about empty, cold space, and one doesn't know that much more. So there, I think we have really, all together here, actually, a great task of just continue to do awareness raising and to bring this out, and also then to member states who are not Arctic or not observers, but maybe wanting to be so, and those that don't even know that they would like to be so. So we continue this. And then also what we could do more is we have great programs within the EU. We have what was mentioned already by you, Mika, I think, the Interreg Aurora program. We have the Northern Periphery and Arctic programs. A lot of money, and I mean, to make sure that this is used in the most let's say, effective and most useful way. And here again, I think there are things we could do in simplifying maybe procedures and working together, but to maintain this level of engagement and to secure also that it continues over the years to come. And here we need all member states to be on board to continue having this engagement.
Thank you. Before we jump over to Ambassador Menzies, Mika wanted to also comment the first question. And did you also want to comment the first? No. Okay, great.
Yeah, shortly. Actually, there are now a lot of collaboration between the Arctic regions and other member state regions. For example, in different level of thematic collaboration within the mining sector, within the sports sector, and plenty of them. And I want to also highlight that there are funding mechanisms that can actually, within the Arctic teams, join different regions and in different parts of Europe. To the future of European Union and Commission policy, of course, idea that creating a stronger macro-regional policy to the Arctic could be one answer. Maybe a stronger instrument which could open up a partner-level collaboration in different themes that are important for the Arctic to other regions. That could be a sort of a future initiative, but there are actually now possibilities.
Just very short comment to your question. I think that we have to differentiate the EU states that have also certain regional initiatives or form of cooperation. Because, for instance, Poland is an observer state to the Arctic Council, but in the same time we are a member of the Baltic Sea States Cooperation. But on the other hand, we are not that much involved, I don't know, in the Mediterranean, for example. So that's something that the member states, from the national perspective and different regional initiatives may differ. But on the other hand, we have this European Union umbrella, like was mentioned, I think, in the first panel by Piotr, when the Arctic is discussed, is within the COEST, so all the member states are observed, even though their interest or their involvement might differ on the practical basis. When it comes to the climate change, it's not only EU, there's also United Nations and other forums when those aspects are taken into account. And for instance, we will be taking the climate change, I don't know, from the Baltic Sea region perspective, but in the same time, it might differ, look different from the, again, Mediterranean or vice versa. So I think it's a standard thing with, let's say, contemporary international relations, and just simply looking to the status of those countries, it doesn't mean that they are excluded for handling the important issues like, again, the climate change. I don't know whether I answered your question, but I tried.
Elle, Merete, was your comment also about the EU? Sorry, Ambassador, if we can take the comments from Elle, Merete first and then move over to the next question.
Yeah. No, but I think I see an increasing interest from not traditional Arctic states in Europe. And especially evident is that when it comes to research. Just to take the Saami Council as an example, on a weekly basis, we get invitations from universities from the southern parts of Europe that wants to engage in Arctic research. So I think there is an interest, and I think there is a window of opportunity if we're able to tailor it right and raise awareness also in other parts of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Then Ambassador.
Great, thank you. Just want to clarify, you mean the relation with provinces, territories in Canada vis-a-vis the Arctic? Yeah. I'll maybe just use Quebec as a great example, because Quebec is showing great leadership on Northern Arctic and has for many, many years. They have they've articulated a Plan Nord, which guides their policies. I see they're a partner of this event. They're a partner of the Arctic Circle Assembly. Canada, the federal government, works closely with the provincial government. They're part of our consultative mechanism that I talked about. We also collaborate with the government, and we do a lot of things that are Quebec, but also Canada. And I know it's maybe sometimes awkward to understand that overseas, but recently at the Arctic Circle Assembly in Reykjavik, we had a large contingent of University of Laval students presenting from a fund that they had all been recipients of, and we launched that as a Canada initiative. So I would say, we're not always in lockstep on everything, but absolutely very coordinated and always communicating on what activities. And I would say the government of Quebec is also hosting, through University of Laval, the Secretariat for the Sustainable Development Working Group, which is one of the initiatives that came out of our federal policy in 2019, was the announcement of that in Quebec. So there's a lot of complementarity to our approaches.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and I was uncertain whether there was one on the floor. At least there's a gentleman with his hand up. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Stefano Valentino. I'm a journalist, and I cover climate change in the Arctic and the Antarctic. So I have a kind of non-politically correct question, which is a follow-up on the question which has been raised. So I'm from Italy, which used to be a Mediterranean country over the 2,000 years. Now it's becoming kind of an Arctic country as well, and for clear geopolitical and economic reasons. So I would like to know if during your cooperation dialogues, you're kind of thinking, or you already set up kind of standards of communication where basically the non-Arctic countries like Italy or the others, they clearly state their intention, to which extent they want to do research, to which extent they want to have access for geopolitical economic reasons, to which extent they really want to contribute to preserve the local communities in a very honest and genuine way, or this is a kind of blurred boundary between different interests.
Thank you. Who would like to take on that?
I'll just say very quickly, I didn't capture all of it, but what I kept thinking of is the importance of everyone being familiar with the criteria to become observers at the Arctic Council, because I think those are good parameters in which Arctic countries want to engage. And one of them is recognition of the sovereignty of Arctic states. Another one is recognition of the people, indigenous communities that are based in the Arctic. And there's a number of other ones, but I just think that's always a good starting point on some of the broader questions about engagement and communication.
Well, and I'll try to respond. Well, from the perspective, and I can respond because I cooperate very closely also with the colleague from Italy, and for a number of years already, actually from your Minister of Foreign Affairs. In terms of the dialogue within the Warsaw format or between the observer states to the Arctic Council, we have, let's call it, regular dialogue. When it comes to national research or scientific involvements, we exchange the info, maybe not that often, but we try to communicate whenever we have those Warsaw format meetings, or when there was, let's say, a business as usual a few years back within the Arctic Council. There was also regular reporting, not only in writing, but also during the meetings, so we can also exchange those different topics or engagement. But we do not coordinate our scientific national involvements, let's say, from the perspective of MFAs. There are existing cooperation, scientific or research projects between the scientists, and sometimes the Ministry of Science are involved, but we do not have, let's say, like common strategy where exactly everybody is involved in different projects. So from this respect, there is nothing like that. Everybody is in a way independent. We are cherry picking and trying to focus those issues that we can provide the certain expertise. So it's, but nevertheless, it's a working structure. It's a working formula. So the dialogue exists. So whenever there is a room for potential joint projects which would require our involvement as MFA, as diplomats, then we can work on that.
Thank you. And Mika, did you also want to comment on this? Yeah,
very shortly. As I mentioned, the collaboration already exists in many levels, and one of the key topics, of course, now in the Arctic, especially in the Nordic Arctic, is the sort of how the green transition can be just, and how for example, the regions and municipalities and people and indigenous people can sort of cope of that big wave of different investments. So this just and legitimacy theme is very important. And an example that we are not doing, Lapland is leading the thematic collaboration in a mining sector, because we have a lot of mines in our area and a lot of exploration, and they are actually in that thematic collaboration now about more than 10 areas in different parts of Europe, from Spain, from Greece, from France. Actually, we are talking with the Lower Silesia in the Poland now, and of course in Sweden. And the theme that is important for us, the just transition, that's actually the topic that we are discussing in the European Union level. And we, of course, hope that for example, transatlantic level in the regional collaboration in the future could rise also, because we see those challenges also in the Canadian Arctic as important. So there are now actually those kind of collaboration methods.
Thank you. Then Elle, Merete.
Yeah, thank you. So I perhaps have a slightly different approach, since we tend to be the pigeonhole for all different requests from all partners and stakeholders in this room. So what we have done is try to outflesh, okay, what are our own knowledge gaps? What kind of support and help do we need in order to strengthen our own societies? So we have developed different documents in Arctic strategy that you can find on our webpage. We have done similarly regarding the EU, said these are our priorities. And last March, we launched a Saami climate report, where we tried to translate the newest scientific and research into a Saami context, so it became available to our communities. and also try to come up with some recommendation on what do we need in order to find just solutions that also incorporate us. So we have taken a slightly different approach since we get so many invitations to different projects. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go in for landing, and I'll pick up the model set by my predecessor, young Gunnar Winter, in the former panel. You had 20 seconds. What are your key recommendations for Arctic cooperation as we move forward? Ambassador?
I'll just give a shout out to the need to engage youth from the north in all discussions. And there's a few panels on that tomorrow that will be worth listening to. And I think when we talk about the Canadian Arctic, over 50% of the population is under the age of 30. So I think we need to listen to Northerners, especially those that are under 30.
Thank
but
you.
over 30 counts too.
Special envoy.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to come back to what you said, Mika, now at the last point, and that is the dialogue about land use and potential difference in land use and how to get everybody in. And I would need to say that we need to be very inclusive here, and it needs to be with governments, with regions, with local people, with indigenous peoples, rights holders, but also business, and just to make sure that we have a transparent and meaningful dialogue on these topics.
Thank you. Piotr.
It will be less recommendation and maybe some sort of a hope. So I hope that maybe in a few years' time, my country engagement as an observer state, leader of the Warsaw format, to enhance the cooperation, to contribute more to the work of the, let's say, European, to the Arctic cooperation, might be qualified in these few years as a mission impossible. And why is that? Because Agent Hunt apparently always wins, and he never gets old. So I think that if we achieve that this contribution would work, I would be extremely happy.
Thank you.
So many people are right holders in the Arctic, and we need to be secured, seat at the table, so we don't become a part of the menu.
Well, shortly, I think that we need, of course, continue the collaboration. What I would like to see in the future is that we really understand the realism behind the big scene. It's going to be, the geopolitical tensions are going to be for long. And that means that we have to be able to think out of box when we think about the future collaboration structures. And from those structures, I hope that they are flexible, they are open to new initiatives and development. That would be my biggest hope.
Thank you. So we have heard that the Arctic Council remains the most important collaborative body in the Arctic. But we need to become better at utilizing all the knowledge that the Arctic Council produces. We do not need new structures for cooperation, but we can look at the numbers of the current existing structures that we have. And we need to ensure that we have enough capacity. And that goes to all levels. The collaboration needs to encompass ministerial, regional, local, and even individual levels. Please join me in giving a big hand to the panelists.